Hello, everyone. My name is Gaston Alonso. I am the director of the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities. We're partnering with a School of Humanities and Social Science to run this year's Student Expo, which is the 5th Student Expo. Thank you for coming. This is the evening event where we get to hear about your individual research projects and your scholarly endeavors. So I'm going to start. We have a number of people who will be presenting, and the first presenter is Madeline.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Madeline Beyer. I'm a fourth-year student in the CUNY Audiology Department, and I'm currently an audiology fellow at the NYU Cochlear Implant Center, where I work with cochlear implant recipients across the lifespan. This project was done in collaboration with my faculty advisor, Dr. Metal Avivirech, in the front row here. Prior to entering the AUD program, I was a sound engineer. And as a student clinician and researcher, one of my primary interests is understanding how people with hearing loss, particularly cochlear implants, experience music. So for some individuals with significant hearing loss, even the most powerful high-quality hearing aids no longer provide sufficient benefit. So for these individuals, cochlear implants may be an option. A cochlear implant, or a CI, has an externally worn sound processor and a surgically implanted device with a tiny array of frequency-specific electrodes that bypass the damaged parts of the cochlea, the organ of hearing, and provide hearing through electrical stimulation of the auditory nerve, the hearing nerve. The technology behind cochlear implants is pretty incredible. It is quite literally electrical hearing, and the benefits are immense. They can provide improved speech understanding. They can afford children who were born deaf with the opportunity to acquire oral speech and language, and they can improve our sense of the sounds in our environment. But despite all of these benefits, music enjoyment and appreciation remains a significant challenge for cochlear implants. There are two primary reasons for this. One is that the ways in which a cochlear implant processor actually processes an acoustic signal is very, very different than the normal auditory system, the normal hearing auditory system, or even a hearing aid. Again, we're thinking about electrical versus acoustic hearing. And we also know that music is significantly more complex than speech. These devices were designed for speech understanding, and music has a lot more to it. So my audiology capstone research focuses on an area of music which has been largely overlooked, and that's spatial perception. Spatial perception of music is significant for several reasons. It creates an immersive listening experience which can allow us to feel more connected to the sounds that we're hearing, and it can also allow us to hear sounds with greater clarity when many different sounds or instruments are happening at once. So there are several different cues that work together to help us localize or make sense of the sounds that we're hearing. So if you imagine that you're at a concert, take this audience member, for example. So he's going to perceive the piano as coming predominantly from his left side, because not only is that sound going to reach his left ear faster, it'll reach his left ear first before it travels around his head to reach his right ear, but it's also going to be perceived as a little bit louder from the left side. Some of that sound, some of the energy of the sound signal will actually be absorbed by the presence of his head by the time it reaches his right ear. And vice versa, this guitar is going to be perceived more quickly and a little bit more loudly by the right ear as compared with the left. So these differences in timing between the ears we refer to as ITDs, interaural timing delay. These differences in levels between the two ears are what we call ILDs, interaural level differences. So again, we're working with timing-based cues and level-based cues to help us make sense of where sounds are coming from. But most of the music that we experience is not in the live concert setting where sounds are actually emanating from their original sound source. A lot of what we listen to comes from our personal listening devices, and we're listening over headphones or AirPods or maybe a small speaker at home. In audio production, spatial effects are achieved through panning. This is a creative tool that actually redistributes the signal level, redistributes the amplitude of an audio signal between different outputs, like a left and a right headphone or a pair of speakers. So if you've ever listened to a song and maybe you noticed that you heard someone's voice a little more on this side, you heard another instrument a little bit more on this side, if you're not aware of this ever happening, I can assure you that you've experienced it without even knowing it. It's a totally ubiquitous tool in audio production, whether it's music, television, film, video game. So by turning this knob here to the right, I'm actually shifting the amount of signal that you're hearing on the right side. And by turning it to the left, you're going to perceive it more as coming from the left. So I can actually create the illusion that sounds are originating from a particular source or that they're in motion. So despite the fact that this is a very common tool in all forms of audio production, it's something I used every day as a sound engineer, it's been really underutilized in auditory research, and we really don't have a sense of how these spatial manipulations are perceived by people with cochlear implants. So for my audiology capstone project, I designed a task in which I could compare the ability of people with cochlear implants to follow moving musical sources mediated through panning in comparison with people with normal hearing. I wanted to assess how their ability to follow along with these moving musical stimuli was impacted by the complexity of the song, meaning how many instruments are happening at once, and also the way in which it was actually moving back and forth between the two speakers. And if you'll think back to those level and timing-based cues that I was just talking about, I wanted to see which of these cues is contributing most predominantly to the ability to perform this task. So I had two different groups here. There were 15 adults with normal hearing and 14 adults with either 2 cochlear implants or 1 cochlear implant and 1 hearing aid. So this is a diagram of what the task actually looked like. Each participant was seated in front of a left-right pair of speakers, and they listened to a bunch of different songs, which I'll get to in just a moment, moving back and forth between the left and the right speaker in different configurations. They needed to identify in which speaker did the song end. Was it in the left or was it in the right? For each participant, I also obtained the smallest timing differences that they were able to perceive between the 2 ears and the smallest level differences that they were able to perceive between their ears. And I administered a survey in order to get a sense of how much musical experience each participant had. Do they listen to music? Do they play music? Have they totally disavowed music after receiving a cochlear implant? So what they were actually listening to, it was 80 different trials of Happy Birthday, so everyone loved it and it was really great. I'm joking, people didn't love listening to Happy Birthday that many times. But they were varying in musical complexity. So some were relatively simple, while others were much more complex. And I know I'm short on time here, but just to give you a sense of what each person was listening to, this is the most simplistic version. All right, so I'll cut that one off. Oh no. And this is the most complex version with all of these voices happening at once. Okay. So a quick graph here. If you look up to this very thin gray line here, that's our normal hearing group. We reached what we call a ceiling effect. The normal hearing participants were able to perform this task with ease. Almost everyone got 100%, and I'm pretty confident the people who missed one were just very bored doing this task. But the cochlear implant group had a significant amount of variation. Scores ranged from about 44% all the way up to 100%. I think my happy birthday is still playing in the background somewhere. So one correlation that I found was that those who were able to discern smaller level differences between the two ears had showed better performance on this task, which makes sense because, like I said, panning is a mechanism of redistributing the level between outputs, between the left and the right speaker. We didn't see any relationship with the timing-based cues or with their self-reported musical experience. So the normal hearing group performed much better than the cochlear implant group. Those small intraoral level differences seem to have an impact on performance on this task. And another thing that I thought was quite interesting is that unlike other musical perception tasks, which have been shown to be negatively impacted by musical complexity, such as following along with the rhythm or identifying a familiar melody, there was no relationship between musical complexity and the ability to follow along with these tasks, with these songs, which suggests to me that spatially manipulated audio may be perceived a little bit differently than other aspects of music perception. So I've learned a lot through this preliminary exploration into panning, and I look forward to continuing to learn more about how our creative tools that we use for music production impact the listening experience for individuals with hearing loss. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Since you're looking at the variation between left and right, is one of the major issues between the sort of two types of hearing, electronic hearing versus acoustic hearing, is it really the cochlear implant is more of a binary? It's either like you're hearing it or you're not? So
no, there is still a dynamic range to cochlear implants. They're programmed in such a way that, you hear, it's certainly not exactly like the normal hearing auditory system, but they're programmed to the best of their ability to hear soft sounds softly and louder sounds more loudly. So it's not quite a binary. Yeah. Questions? I know I'm short.
Anybody else? Questions? Thank you so much.
Very much.
Next I have Shatisha. Hello.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, thank you. I'm Shatisha Bryant. I am a junior and my major is theater and professional communications. I dove into this research because I am a spoken word artist and I wanted to connect with my ancestral roots. And so I named my presentation From Land to Sea. I wanted to it reflects the ancestral journey of Black people from the land of origin, Africa, through enslavement towards freedom, visibility, and the ongoing fight to truly be seen through civil rights. And today, I'm exploring how the West African jelly tradition influences my spoken word as a Black artist, embodying the part of this journey in Brooklyn. The table of contents. And this is my introduction page. This table, it shows parallels between the jelly tradition and the Black spoken word. And if you can see and notice, they both show the perseverance of culture through storytelling and provide social commentary. The jelly tradition and the griots, the jelly tradition is a cornerstone of West African oral culture, especially within the Manda societies. These historians, musicians, storytellers preserve culture, and the women griots are vital keepers of history and song, often focusing on women's experiences and perspectives through their art. And in this piece, which I wrote, Hips and Dip, it speaks to some of those deeply personal experiences. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got home on the other side, the other side, the other side, the other side. You struggle to see in me a sway, a dip, a bend in me, a sway, a dip, a bend in me. You orchestrated the rhythm. You told me the beat. I did not sway. I did not dip. And then I had good knees. I had good knees. I had good knees. I had good standing knees, good knock knees, good strong knees, good Similac behind the knees is good knees. And now I walk with a dip, against a dip, a crippled dip. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got home on the other side. So that was just a bit from there. And as a Black woman artist in Brooklyn, I connect deeply with the griots. Like them, my spoken word keeps our stories alive. It keeps our stories alive. It reflects our experiences and speaks truth, which is my truth in my community. And for my last piece, which that's my reference list, and my last piece, Raw, which I wrote. No more will I fall back, background, backstage, back page, on my back will I lay my burdens down. I take them to the river, wipe me down. Tsunamis try to floor me, but here's my crown. And now I stand before you to proclaim that I's and we's could never be the same. We could never be the same. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. We've come so far from land to damned to sea. I see you, sis. I feel you, brother, and I'm here to tell you that them prayers worked from our foremothers. The faith the size of a mustard seed that kept hope alive so that we can be. See? No more. No more. Silence no more. I was born to roll. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? I just want to say that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
I have a question. Who's your biggest fan?
That's my daughter's symphony.
Angelica? Angelica.
Okay, hi, I'm Angelica. I am presenting an analysis I did on the Pulitzer-winning book, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz. And I'm going to be exploring these three themes through the language mechanics in the novel. And those are like genre, such as fantasy, mythology, the concept of translanguaging and the concept of blankness. And so to begin, I want to start with the role of mythology in the novel, because that's how the novel is situated. So this passage here is the opening, they're the opening lines of the novel. And so the fuku, that's, it's bolded there, is a curse. And so what is happening in this passage is that the fuku is being situated as, and this curse that will be shown upon all the characters throughout the novel is situated as a result of the Spanish conquistadors in the Dominican Republic. And for additional context, the setting in the novel it takes place both during and after the Trujillo dictatorship, who was sort of symbolically an extension of colonialism in the country. And so the fuku drives the underscoring political narrative in the novel of unrest and dissatisfaction with the Dominican government. And so the curse is ultimately attributed to the main character Oscar's demise. And in an article by Emily Shiflett on this, she writes that the application of this trope to colonial subjects as a mean by which to depict their innocence and by extension their lack of progress as a community. So what the fuku is that representation of the country's lack of progress, but also their innocence in the face of colonialism. And for additional context, I'm going to read an excerpt from the novel that sort of demonstrates the culture and the household that the main character Oscar grew up in, and then how the fantasy genre acts as sort of a subversion to those expectations. Oscar cried in the bathroom where nobody could hear him. Anywhere else, his 000 batting average with the ladies might have passed without comment, but this is a Dominican kid we're talking about in a Dominican family. Dude was supposed to have atomic level G, was supposed to be pulling in the bitches with both hands. Everybody noticed his lack of game, and because they were Dominican, everybody talked about it. And that passage continues to state that Oscar's uncle would then encourage him to force himself upon a woman to solve the problem of the fact that Oscar, due to his weight and his interests and his romantic inclinations, he fails to meet the socially assigned machismo expectations of Dominican men. And so in that solace of not fitting in, he uses fantasy to fill his time, and he aspires to be the Dominican Tolkien, and that is a nod to a high fantasy author. And I want to define fantasy. So this is a quote by Susan Mandela. Fantasy and its escapist nature provide pathways to exploring attitudes towards difference and exposing social fears. So through fantasy, Oscar's disengaging with the identity that he's been conditioned to align with. And then returning to Shiflett's analysis that the fuku, the curse, is used to distance Dominicans from their colonizers. Both mythology and fantasy can then be seen as escape routes for the characters to hide from their trauma, essentially. And escapism is super prevalent in the novel due to those two language mechanics, and the prevalence of escapism implies that there's not a lack of, but a discouragement of cultural change. And in the absence of cultural change, speakers will find ways to communicate that both honor history and modernity. And so the next language mechanic I want to talk about is translanguaging, which is a sociolinguistic term. And it's the ability to move through languages fluidly, but also that all languages that a speaker uses are part of one system. You'll have heard of the term code switching, and so that is the narrator Junior of the novel, he code switches a lot. And so code switching is the alternating during a conversation. And so what Junior does in the novel, as we saw in the opening quote, if you had a second to read it, you see here that he talks about history, he talks about, and like, there's different tones and different dialects that he's using here. He's cursing in it, all within the same few lines. So the quote that's up here is by the author of the article, translating Spanglish to Spanish on this novel. And Kingery writes that the novel places great emphasis on code switching, resisting a monolithic mainstream English by incorporating Spanish in a wide range of vernaculars. And what she goes on to discuss is Diaz, the author's decision to engage in what is called the art of assertive non-translation. And so by refusing sort of to assign a certain dialect to the narrator Junior, this highlights the theme of identity. You see that the author talks about Junior's Latino and African American identities. The article calls some of his dialects academies and nerd speak. And so the point of this is to highlight the theme of identity, but not exactly outline a clear character definition for Junior. It actually serves to encourage a more intentional reading experience and welcome varying identities, sometimes within the same paragraph, the same page, the same line, which will lead me to my next point of the concept of blankness. And so white space was really intriguing to me. White space is a poetic device, referring to the literal space around words in a poem. But it also exists in this novel. And so this passage that's up here is a scene, I believe, a response to the colonial legacy imprinted on the Dominican Republic. And so this passage is from, spoiler alert, Oscar's death. He is captured by the antagonist of the novel, the Capitan, his men, for the second time. And the context of this capture and his demise is that he's been pursuing Iban, who is involved with the Capitan, and he continues to attempt to have a relationship with this woman because he is attempting to transform her into an individual. This is from Shiflett. Oscar's words, which focus on the little intimacies, imply he values her individuality. Unlike the Spanish conquerors and their militaristic legacy, Oscar does not see her as a faceless body. So this is another example of Oscar subverting the expectations he grew up with and rejecting machismo culture, but also in turn rejecting the colonial legacy of the Spanish conquistadors who brought conquest and the concept of conquering to the country. And so Shiflett continues to say that, so here Junior is talking about Oscar, and the rest of this page is blank, and there's a lot of blank space on this page in the novel. And Shiflett continues to say that Diaz leaves the remainder of the page blank, suggesting Oscar's death serves as an attempt to wipe away the individual history of another victim of the Dominican's colonial past. Oscar's death paints a bleak portrait of stepping outside the systematic categorization colonialism's legacy has imprinted on Dominican society. And so that is the first example of blankness. And then Junior himself, in his narration, Diaz includes blank spaces that we're supposed to interpret as Junior's words. And so this is the same idea as what Shiflett was talking about, but these blank lines and the absence of language when talking about Oscar's death encourage the reader to see blankness as language in itself. And this is explored in an article by Sophia Ravison called Pretending That the Scribble Was Letters, Words, Names, Blankness as a Mode of Storytelling. And what Ravison writes is that this simultaneously suggests that words can be a means of saving, and that blank space can be just as valid as spoken and written language, not necessarily as a means of saving, but as a means of knowing the value of words, right? So this is just another example. And then the final example I want to leave you with is that at the end of the novel, it is suggested that Oscar's last words in his last book of self-proclaimed wisdom on living and what it means to be alive is essentially a book of empty pages, or at least that's what the reader is asked to imagine due to the blankness and the non-existence of the language. And so, like Ravison argues, this scene forces the reader to contemplate but ultimately accept the things that they don't or literally can't understand. And that includes because of the language barrier or just literally the lack of language. And so, in conclusion, this novel is a book about definitions and defining others and redefining yourself and redefining narratives that are bestowed upon you by history, but also what happens when a reader is forced to sit with uncomfortable tonal experiences and silences and worlds that they just don't understand, and what happens when a reader is forced to fill in the blanks. So, yeah, thank you so much. Sorry.
Anybody have any questions?
Can you show the first slide, please?
Yes.
I would love to take a picture of the book.
Okay. Thank you. We're upset. Seth.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to everybody who had a hand in setting this up. Really good to be here, and the first three students that went. I mean, just the diversity of disciplines that are here, really great. And Shatisha, I'm amazed that I'm a musician, not a very good one, but your ability to switch between speaking and doing a beautiful presentation and just full-on visceral, beautiful voice. Really great. And the tech help as well. Setting this up. I'm a real pretty bad with tech, so it's really impressive. You give me two balls to juggle, that's too much. But so I'm Seth Goldman. I'm a double major, philosophy and political science. And I want to thank Professor Anna Gottlieb, even though she's not here. Her juicy question prompt is what sent me down this fun rabbit hole. And so her question was: is there an obligation to obey the law? And if yes, then where does our obligation to obey the law come from? If not, what are the ethical, practical, political justifications for disobeying it? In other words, can we justify acts of civil or not so civil disobedience? And if so, how? And I would say this: we're not living in normal times right now, and to pretend otherwise is just, it's a little rough. And so the day before Trump got sworn in, I was lucky enough to go to a really beautiful celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life at the Apollo. And, because Trump got sworn in on Martin Luther King Day. And it was just I think we all needed a little bit of hope and sort of something to feel like there was a ray of light. And it was just a beautiful celebration. So what I wanted to do was the fount of this paper for me was a letter that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to white clergy in 1963. after he was jailed for marching without a petition in Birmingham, Alabama. And a little bit of background is, before I read parts of my paper, is that the white clergy wrote him this letter, basically telling him to slow down, and he was incensed. And the letter even praised the Birmingham Police Department for being so gentle. And Martin Luther King just could not believe, like there's a famous adage, justice too long delayed is justice denied. And what I really love about Martin Luther King's nonviolent direct action is that it's so simple. But behind it, I mean, he was a man of the cloth and a man of philosophy, and he knew that using political philosophy, which this country was founded on, for better or worse, like John Locke, he knew that access to political power was the way to get a just tomorrow. And so he uses all of these underlying assumptions of natural law theory to basically get what's known as secondary precepts. And simply put, a just law is a law that uplifts the human spirit, and an unjust law is one that degrades the human spirit. And it is just to obey a just law, and it is unjust to obey an unjust law. And moreover, it's a moral imperative to disobey unjust laws. So the way I feel this is, Martin Luther King is just a real beacon of hope, is that he draws on all these fields, and he really makes it his own. And as someone who is, I consider myself a Marxist-Leninist. I am a big believer in Frantz Fanon and decolonization struggles. I'm afraid of guns, right? So I'm like the least, radical person there is when it comes down to it. So I couldn't personally, the dictatorship of the proletariat, like Lenin talks about, I get it and it makes sense, but I couldn't, most dictatorships of the proletariat have lasted for like 80 years and just been met with more repression. So I find that Martin Luther King, he found himself in 1963 between two factions. Oh, by the way, before I go any further, if like all you hear is Charlie Brown when I'm talking, and someone hasn't read the letters from a Birmingham jail, just really spend some time with that. It's really wonderful. There's something in it for everybody. Basically, oh my gosh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Basically, he felt in 1963 in jail writing this letter, and he even apologizes in the letter for writing such a long letter, but that he was between two factions. And he saw that in the Jim Crow South, where, mind you, in 1963, segregation was illegal. It was unconstitutional because of Brown versus Board of Ed, but there were still segregation statutes. So he was on the one side, he saw that these unjust laws, or the unjust implementation of segregation laws, were degrading people. And he saw this apathy and indifference and pain really starting to just sort of get sclerotic and solidified and lead to sort of what I see now as a political inaction. But on the other side, he didn't live to see the Black Panther Party formed in the 70s, but he saw sort of what he considered a more militant element in Malcolm X, and he wasn't okay with that either. So he felt like he was sort of, his way was sort of like a bridge between like the militant aspects of Malcolm X, which he felt was just that you can't get just ends through unjust means of violence. And similarly, he was also calling out the white clergy for praising the police department of Birmingham, saying you cannot maintain unjust ends with moral means. That's not acceptable. What I really like about Martin Luther King is he was a natural law theory expert. So natural law from Thomas Aquinas, who was also a man of the cloth, held that the end of law is for human happiness, and that laws, and this is what I really like, is that laws can be added onto it, but it's really they're just sort of reason, which we're all given, and that's part of the natural law. We use reason to find these other precepts that reason is able to find, but that weren't there. So we can either we can sort of correct, and it can get corrupted by men. So yes, Martin Luther King, he drew heavily on this, and he felt that that basically John Locke was also a natural law theorist, who, in my opinion, he favored. He believed that property, life, liberty, and property were part of natural law. So the only reason we leave the state of nature is to preserve our life, liberty, and property. And I argue in my argument, I say that today, as in 1963, that we are basically as good as in a state of nature, if not worse off. And that African Americans in 1963 Birmingham were better off in a state of nature, because in the state of nature, you still have the freedom and the power to protect yourself and to enforce the law. Whereas when you enter a commonwealth, you forfeit some of that power to enforce the law. And here's where John Locke goes up against Hobbes, who believes that there is a supreme, the best way to secure our life, liberty, and happiness is to give all our power up to a supreme sovereign. But John Locke feels that this is as good as tyranny, because then all of us, we have means of redress through the law with each other. But when there's a tyrant, or when there's a king of ill will, we have only an appeal to heaven. So there are three inconveniences that John Locke had, and I argue that those three were violated in 1963 in Birmingham, and today, presently, with somebody who believes through the false opinions that he is a king and is beyond the law. And that when these two situations, though they're 62 years apart, that you're morally obligated to break the law. And I'm trying to go to law school because I want to learn, like Martin Luther King, how to get justice, a real justice, and the moral kind of justice. Because so often something is de jure legal, and even Martin Luther King even brings up how in Nazi Germany, everything helping Jewish people to evade capture was illegal, de jure. But so I'll just read a little bit of this, and feel free to boot me if there's some time concerns. But yeah, I really, and further, a little bit more background is in 1984, Ronald Reagan said, and I believe he kind of ushered in with Margaret Thatcher this real nightmare that we're still living in. Reagan said, "It's morning in America." And remember from natural law that Thomas Aquinas said, the end of government, or the end of law, is human happiness. So if the end of government is to create law for human happiness, then how can Ronald Reagan say with a straight face as the head of the government that the 9 worst words you can ever hear is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you"? So for 40 plus years, we've been trying to, Clinton alike, Biden, I mean everybody, and Biden did unimaginable things in the 90s when he was in the Senate, but has basically been eroding government and trying to free capitalism. And basically I argue that Trump is like the last man standing, and he's finishing the job that Reagan started. And that if we want to live to see another day, to actually realize the dream, the really beautiful dream that Martin Luther King had, we've got to civilly disobey every chance we get, whether that's the judges letting people out of the back door, or just anything, speaking out against genocide in Israel. I mean, so many courageous people. Any little acts, just being like-minded and continuing to be in rooms like this is what we can do. Okay, so drawing from the lesson, and again, kick me off if I go over. I'm just glad to be here. 2 minutes. Oh boy. Okay, so that's good to know. All right. Let me see what's a good section. Okay. I'll go for. Okay. This brings me to my last point before concluding that MLK Jr.'s philosophy as praxis is perhaps our greatest lodestar for any epoch, but in particular for our twilight in America, assuming after all that it was Reagan's morning in America ushering in the beginning of our last day, where all of American justice is under assault by the whims of a Hobbesian king. Although Socrates condemned civil disobedience and MLK Jr. perfected the art of civil disobedience, MLK Jr. was the consummate Socratic practitioner. Socrates went around trying to bring false opinions, injustice to the truth of natural law, to the light of consciousness, so that love of wisdom could perhaps disabuse people of these obstructions on the path to discovery and refinement of natural law. After centuries of injustice in America, Martin Luther King Jr. understood that persuading white Americans to change their minds while tolerating injustice through obedience to the law was not working. Moreover, it may have helped to prolong the injustice. Martin Luther King Jr. had to break with Socrates in order to supersede his intellectual forebear in the furtherance of love, humanity, truth, and justice. He broke new ground, expressing the highest respect for the law by openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty, persuade America by disobeying unjust laws and bringing the televised, benighted prejudice into the homes and consciousness of all America. Breaking the law worked to persuade Americans to change the laws, enforce them evenly, and look within themselves to reckon with the dark injustice of hate. He, like Socrates, did indeed pay the penalty with his life. As we continue along the uncharted waters of a second Trump presidency, assuming for the moment that heaven is where good souls go when they die, and that Socrates and Martin Luther King Jr. were on the side of good, I find it pressing to ask, 1, if the state of nature is a war of all against all, as Hobbes continues to haunt us, and an absolute sovereign, and 2, an absolute sovereign leaves the masses worse off vis-a-vis the sovereign than in a state of nature, by dint of the fact that the masses have no impartial judge on which to appeal for grievances against the sovereign, who alone has retained all the liberty and power which the masses had to give up to join the Leviathan. 3, and this absolute sovereign, who prides himself on the law and order, shows utter disregard at best, or outright contempt for truth at worst, and denies any reality independent of power. And 4, the absolute sovereign is attempting to undermine and control all laws, and thus the whole body of law. How can we do anything but appeal to heaven, the collective consciousness of Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and Socrates, who King praises for his civil disobedience, and revolt through civil disobedience on the greatest scale this country has ever dreamed of? We are morally obligated to bring a necessary fiat to one person, that no one is above the natural law, especially one who seeks to violate King's addition to the greatest scale, namely that any law that degrades man is unjust, and any law that uplifts humanity is just. We, however, would be the foolish ones if we freely consent to remain in a commonwealth with him as our supreme ruler, lest we prove him right and annul the law of nature, a metaphysical impossibility, with only a vain cry to heaven as the truth crashes through the fading light of consciousness and reason, the profound truth that we will not make it through to see another morning unless we fight like hell and disobey at every chance we get to rewrite injustice, save and improve the public weal, and remember that once upon a time we consented to leave the state of nature, giving up some of our freedom and power in the process, to 3 co-equal branches of government whose job was to shield us not only from foreign threats, but from the most pernicious threat, the unnatural tyrant from within, whom only the darkness inside of us can set free. Blind obedience will ensure this, but only perspicuous, resounding disobedience will expel the false opinions of injustice. And it could be the closest we ever get to the truth, but who's to say that what's in store for us as we contemplate our journey across the river Styx, like King and Socrates before him, after a life of chasing justice along the endless river of struggle. A river that also abides by the unchangeable laws of nature, flowing always towards justice. It matters not if we know it, but it sure is more beautiful when we strive to. And whatever price we incur is but a small penalty to pay for our prima facie obligation to humanity and our dream to see another day. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are you going?
Sorry about that. I'm weird. I'm a rigid rule adherent, even and timelines.
Questions?
I apologize.
Oh, it's connected. Oh, okay. So I wanted to ask, so Martin Luther King, near the end of his life, he's kind of quoted as saying that he started to question whether he led his people into a burning building, right? A society built on, here I wrote it here, like unmoral truths that were developed and so what sort of conclusion do you think, like how do you think we battle within the current system, or do we take more of like an anarchist kind of way towards this system and try and just not destroy it, but just restart, because it's been developed on these unjust, unmoral rules.
Musa, oh my God, you ask the best questions always. We have a bunch of classes together. I would say that's a really amazing question, and I feel that a lot of people sort of paint Martin Luther. Sometimes they paint him and they sort of like smooth away the rougher edges. But I think he saw that this building was burning, and I would say, again, at heart, I think abolishing the system is the best, right? Destroying the system, but it's every time progressives have tried, it's failed miserably. And I think like there's some left-wing views. I'm left-wing myself. There's this sort of ideological purity that I think leads to a sort of insularity, and violence I'm with King that sort of using violence, and like Fanon kind of understands was necessary in Algeria, that it doesn't lead necessarily to a better system, and it sort of could just be just destruction. So I feel that civilly disobeying and sort of chipping away at the system and just sort of using the light of morality that he believed was in each of us as a man of the cloth, like Thomas Aquinas, and as a man of philosophy like Plato and Kant. I think just chipping away is the best way, because I think I've heard some people say that just destroying the system, like there are some radicals who believe that Trump destroying the system is going to lead to magically a rebuilt revolution, a utopia. And so I think King had the right idea. And sorry.
No, can I just ask one more question? So I was interested because you come from the idea that like there's like these natural laws, right? And that they're like, so you kind of come from it from like they're objective, right? They're good in of themselves. But I wonder, laws right now, they're drawn from subjective things, right? Opinions, we all have different opinions on what's just and what's unjust, but laws make them objective truths, right? They make them something that we must not question, and they're always right. So if Trump decides to, or whoever decides to make some idiotic rule, right, where birthright citizenship is not good anymore, get them out, and I'm going to take maybe a utilitarian kind of viewpoint of like, okay, the majority think that's true and will bring more pleasure, let's kick them out. I mean, who says that they're wrong, right? Because it's an I don't agree with this. I'm totally in your camp, but I wonder, how can you justify a subjective thing drawn from something that's objective drawn from something that's subjective? How can you counter that, right? Right.
No, that's and this is why I love Martin Luther King Jr. Because if I can't speak for him, but what I love is I feel like he has the tools. What I love about philosophy is it's sort of an entrance, or it's like a foyer into like before you just start any discussion of aesthetics, art, history, whatever. And what I like is he knows the lingo, right? So he knows John Locke. He thinks that the state of nature is great. Like you've got life, liberty, and property. So he basically he says everything this country is founded upon the reason, natural law that the use of reason, which we all have, stumbled upon. So life, liberty, and property, and the obsession with property. So he would say, well, quite simply, I can't say this, but what I like about him in his letters to Birmingham jail is that look, I've told you, with my reason, I've told you that any law that degrades humanity is unjust, and therefore we have a moral obligation to disobey it. And that any law that treats us all as the equal, rational beings that we are is just, and we have a moral obligation to follow that law. So what I like is he, with his genius grasp of like myriad spheres of life, he was like, no, you're not getting that past me. I boil this down, and like things may be de jure illegal, and you can pass your laws and make your executive actions, but no, like wrong is wrong and right is right. Great question as always, Moose. I can't wait till you're up here. And thank you so much.
Demetrius.
Hello, my name is Demetrius Joseph, and I will be presenting my project, The Hidden Open Spaces at Brooklyn College. So I am a third year junior in Brooklyn College. I've been researching this project since my second year as a sophomore, where I was doing a lot of research in sociology, which is my major, and I came up with this idea to explore Brooklyn College open spaces to see what Brooklyn College is really looking like and what is it lacking, because there's a lot of spaces that students come to explore and faculty members come to experience what students are really going through in their personal lives. So Brooklyn College is a community school that students wants to find out what they want to do with their major, what they want to do with their careers after graduating Brooklyn College. But the lack of it is Brooklyn College is very underfunded, where the fundings is the main essential part of what students are really having trouble. CUNY used to be free back in the 90s, but now today with the tuition, and it's not helping students paying for their courses and trying to find out the essential needs of what they need to finish their courses in order to get to their classes, to their jobs that they want to do outside of it. So the statement of the problem, as I said, was Brooklyn College is a community school located in central Brooklyn, a borough in the fast-paced, expensive city of New York. The experience of social isolation is related to a culture in which students attend classes among many other responsibilities and engage social life that many associate with campus life is often difficult to find and non-existent for many students. So when I look at that, some people want to say, what is isolation? So isolation is where people stay away from others while not getting the resources that they want to experience in person. So a lot of students was facing isolation during the pandemic, where everything started to shut down, and then we don't know like the essential needs that a lot of students want to present and show a lot of self-advocacy for themselves. So that way, a lot of students don't really know how to get around the college. Some students may not know where this building is or how or what times they have classes. Some students have time management that we don't know what we can discuss about or we can find the solution of that. So this came up with the research question I have built up is how do students find out viable resources and opportunities on campus that allows them to have a better experience at Brooklyn College where they do not feel isolated. So that way, when I ask this question, I can see what others might respond based on how they feel about belonging in the community space of Brooklyn College, where we want to feel belonging at. So here's the background that I have been developing. So the research approach, the study utilizes participatory action research. I have been using this throughout my development of sociology when I first started back in late 2023 up to current now with a current professor. And participatory action research is an interactive method where researchers and participants collaborate to analyze and address real-world issues. So that way, a lot of students can address those real-world issues to apply to the challenges they're facing in Brooklyn College up to date. So the participants I have did was a total of 16 students from 2 sociology courses that I have took were classical social theory and contemporary social theory, which I have conducted research over the last 2 semesters in my time of sociology. So the focus was to study, explore Karl Marx's concept of extreme labor alienation, examining how students at Brooklyn College experience alienation in their academic and social environments. That way, alienation is where a lot of people who was facing a lot of difficulty for themselves and don't want to belong in that space create a lot of lack of where students don't want to explore what Brooklyn College has going on for their own careers and academics that we need to apply to our own studies outside of college, because we're not only experiencing what the college has, but we're applying to what we need to know so we can gather information to build on that research outside of college so we can get that depth, which is very important for our own lives. And the research activities I did was conducted in-depth readings and discussions on Marx theory, a class based on my class with contemporary social theory. We created video content to engage a wider audience in conversations about the idea of alienation, and interacted with Brooklyn College students to get insights on their campus experience based on how they're feeling with the college experiences and the in-depth sources that they want to use outside of that. So students reported feeling alienated on campus due to several institutional barriers, including a non-functioning cafeteria, limiting access to affordable and convenient food options. Like, for example, the Boyer Hall Cafe that a lot of students likes to go chill, eat during their lunch breaks after classes. Sometimes as students don't really know where to go, they go there to chill and just have their own lunch break. Difficulties scheduling appointments with financial advisors, create obstacles in managing tuition, aid, and academic planning. For example, the Navigate 360, that's where we find these resources so we can balance out them to see how much tuition we have in our account. And we make sure that we want to gather all of these information to see where we stand. And finally, the lack of clear information on available student resources, leaving many unaware of helpful campus services, because a lot of students may not know where to navigate to one place to another, which makes it hard to get around in Brooklyn College when they first start as upcoming freshmen. And it's very sad that a lot of students want to experience this when they start as freshmen, but then they don't know where to go, as I first experienced this problem while coming to Brooklyn College in August of 2022. So, the engagement challenges. Researchers encountered social distancing behaviors among students who often avoid interactions by focusing on their phones or listening to music, making peer engagement difficult. And then that's been happening for a very long time, because not everyone knows where to go or what to do. So they have to use the technology in order to keep themselves in company. So these are the preliminary findings that I have been discovering. Throughout ethnographic exploration, students discover various offices, resources, and opportunities on campus that were previously unknown to many. Study highlights gaps in communication and accessibility that contribute to the feelings of disconnection and alienation among students, preferably recognized as social isolation. The discovery of different offices on campus revealed students can have very different experiences. For example, the Black and Latino Male Initiative in 3309 James Hall, which is where the sociology department is, and I'm a member of that. So direct engagement and participation in these offices often come later in a student's academic career, sometimes when it's too late to have a meaningful experience. So this is a chart I have been discovering. How can students learn about BLMI? So this chart has revealed that out of 370 responses from members who are part of the Black and Latino Male Initiative, students need direct contact through email, a faculty and staff member, or another student for them to learn about this program. And that way, like let's say like 105 students learn VLMI from faculty and staff. That way they can get that information to know what that space is and where they want to feel belonging in and how they want to include others in that shared space. So my goals in my future research is I develop my poster at the Eastern Sociological Society in Boston, Massachusetts in March, where I have overcome those issues and gathered all this information as it's still ongoing, so I can share out to see what other people might think about it, how they want to interact with it, and how I can get all the support in order to develop more of this research to get answers that I can feel a comfort to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was nice. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, Demetrius. The answer is more email? That sort of seemed to be the implication. Is that a correct assumption? Is that a correct deduction from what you've said? The students should get more email from us? Yeah?
Yeah.
It would be helpful? All right. I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, so like I think it's possible that people are looking online for resources of where to go because they can't it's hard for them to, it could be hard for them to figure it out, you know, in person. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next we have Angelina.
All right, so my presentation is on Operation Sail 1976, and this was a parade that was held in New York City that welcomed sailing ships from around the world. It was used to celebrate the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence. So yeah, as I just mentioned, it was held in New York Harbor, and so the question is, how does like a parade of ships really connect to the American Revolution, and does it really have to have a connection? Like, what did Operation Sail 1976 achieve? Here's a picture of several of the sailing ships that were visiting New York on the occasion of the bicentennial. So the parade was held at the Verrazano Bridge and moved up Hudson River. There were over 200 sailing ships, and there was probably a connection to the fact that had been 200 years of American history. There were also hundreds of other craft, and there were 53 naval units. And the Coast Guard also had their boats there to make sure that everything was safe, and because there were a lot of sightseeing boats that were watching the parade. And it was the biggest crowd in the city's history, with more than 6 million spectators. Yeah, so here we see several of the tall ships, which are at the piers. And of course, you can see that there are large crowds. One of the things that the police noted from this event, who had been there, was that there had been so many smiles that they had seen because this was such a historic event. So we see pleasure boats, right? These small boats that are spectating the parade. And so this event had been planned since 1971, and it was designed, so the goal of Operation Sail was to bring New Yorkers together during the difficult times of the 1970s, because these events, this event would help during this time, which was characterized by fiscal crisis, as well as other issues such as political division. And so the question is, what does Operation Sail 1976 reveal about New York City at the time? Because perhaps this event actually reveals more about New York City in the 1970s than it does about the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. So it really just connects to the fact that there was a lot of distrust in the government, there was a lot of economic trouble, and there was high crime in the 1970s. And so an event like Operation Sail was going to lift people's spirits and unite them during a time of division. And so the thing was, if there's going to be a unifying event, the city would have to focus on creating something celebratory, as opposed to something that was presenting anything as a sort of historical interpretation or narrative. And Operation Sail proved that the city can come together and celebrate even in difficult times, which also is relevant to us today as we think about what is the potential that New Yorkers have to celebrate when there are difficult times. Who was behind Operation Sail? Right, so there was a nonprofit organization that became known as Operation Sail in 1976. And so we have yachtsmen, we have retired Coast Guard and Navy officers, maritime executives, and others who were doing sort of the logistical and organizational work. And then we have the driving force behind Operation Sail. That was Frank Brainerd, who was a ship historian, maritime historian, author who had been enthusiastic about ships pretty much his whole life, and was the founder of the South Street Seaport. There's the South Street Seaport Museum. You can visit it today. I've been there over the summer when I was doing my research on Operation Sail as part of the Gardner Fellowship. I'm a history major. Sorry, I mentioned that before, but yeah, I'm double majoring in history and art. And Brainerd was the general manager of Operation Sail. So he was sort of getting people to volunteer to support the event and organize this event, because this was a major event for the bicentennial. Like, it was New York City, and this was the event. And so we see one of the ships here was the Amerigo Vespucci. It was from Italy, and it was in New York Harbor. Of course, there were, like I said, 200 sailing ships, over 200 sailing ships, and all were from different countries, and that's Frank Brainerd. And now the big question that drives this whole research on Operation Sail that I was doing is why ships? Like, why were we celebrating the 200-year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence with a parade of sailing ships? And so there was sort of a significance to shipping in U.S. and New York City history. And so we see in the documents surrounding the planning phase of Operation Sail references sort of to the history of immigration that used ships towards New York Harbor, which is where the event was being held, and in Ellis Island. And we also know that there was a lot of maritime trade and shipping that sort of made New York City and the United States become wealthy, because New York was a port city. And at the time, the United States also wanted to emphasize sort of its military power, which is why there was also a parade of military ships besides sailing ships. And military ships sort of symbolize that. And overall, there was this key theme that, as opposed to other countries that are sort of founded on land, America was a country that was founded based on ships traveling the oceans, even with the explorers and the settlers. But then that leads us to the whole question of what was being ignored in this sort of focus on ships. And one of the major things sort of that was ignored is sort of the bad history that is associated with ships, right? Like the transatlantic slave trade, which made use of ships. And also just the whole emphasis on maritime experiences and what it's like to be a sailor and all of that. There was a lot of emphasis on the glories of the sea. So what were traders and whalers and shipbuilders and captains and all of that? Well, even though there may be an appeal to that, at the same time, there's a lot of hardship throughout history when it comes to people doing those occupations. So all of that was sort of ignored. But then again, what does that tell us? That reveals to us a lot about New York City in the 1970s, because there was already a lot of stress, there was a lot of difficulty, there was a lot of division, political, social division. And New Yorkers didn't really want to emphasize anything negative, and they didn't really want to think about anything like that. And so the whole sort of administration that was handling this event wanted to present something that was celebratory during those times. And so the motivation for holding this event, right, Operation Sail 1976, as part of the planning phase, why did the city really go through with this? Like, why did they agree? Well, there was a lot of sort of incentive for benefiting the city. So the mayor believed that this would bring in vast financial benefits, as there would be a lot of people who would be visiting New York and who would be watching this event, all of people from around the world, and especially from the country. And it would bring financial benefits and also just morale, because at that time there was sort of a sense that New York City is a lost cause. So it would make New Yorkers proud of their city. And also internationalism, because at this time Brainerd invited ships, even those that were like from countries that the US was having tensions with, right? Like even the Soviet Union, like he invited their ships as well. He wanted to emphasize sort of unity in the world and harmony. So these are just ships that he invited that sort of, there was controversy around these countries due to tensions. But these are like all of the tall ships that we see. So they were from all sorts of different countries. And at first there were sort of fears that something is bound to go wrong, because of course New York was in difficult times, so there were like fears of overcrowding and traffic jams and just anything that could possibly ruin the event. But then July 4th came, and it proved to be an event that all could enjoy. And the event also was significant to the people who were watching it, not only from the spectator boats, but also from the shorelines in different ways. They appreciated it in different ways. Like some people appreciated it because it was connected to their family who came here as immigrants, or their family who was in wartime, like during the Second World War, like they had experiences there, and so it sort of made them think of it, and it was kind of an emotional experience as well. And so there's just some pictures of people watching the ships, and there's some of the sailors. And so the fears proved to be unfounded, because the people all behaved well, and everybody sort of, there wasn't all this like overcrowding and like crazy traffic that people expected, because they like managed everything well, they prepared, they planned, and so it was a success. And we see other people like watching this from New Jersey as well. And so sort of the reflections on this event is that in a time of crisis, right, there was a lot of crisis during the 1970s, economic, political, that this event did become a celebration that went off without a hitch. And the media's fears beforehand were unfounded. And it proved that New Yorkers can get along even during difficult times. President Ford called it the event, the greatest 4th of July any of us will ever see. That was President Ford at the time, watching the ship parade from the U.S. Forrestal. Yeah, so it was an important event in a time of division, and even if it was a vague celebration, sort of, what it did was not promoting, it was promoting reflection. If not on the Declaration of Independence, it allowed people to enjoy something together, and it made them feel that they weren't powerless, that ordinary people at the grassroots level can accomplish a lot, even when they feel that they're like in the grips of powerful forces that they can't control. And that's it.
Anybody have any questions? Yes, James.
So I'm just wondering, is there a, I guess, sort of chicken and egg kind of thing? Was, like, in your research, did you find that it was really New York trying to find something to, you know, make the city seem less shitty, and then they're like, oh, ships. What else could we do that's a big event? Like, we'll just do this sort of patriotic ship event. Or was it like, you know, we have all these tall ships all around the country and we'd like to do a parade. You know, is there a city that wants to do that? Because I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, well, what other really big space does New York City have that could have millions of people show up all at the same time? Well, there's not that many. But the coastline is huge. So I'm just wondering, like, chicken and egg, how did it sort of?
Yeah, so I think that is because sort of using that space would allow more people to access an event, because that was kind of the whole goal behind the event, was creating an event that all could access and enjoy. And so somehow we would bring New Yorkers together and bring the world together. You can't really have some kind of indoor event that brings everybody together, so it had to be something that could be broadcast. So in order for sort of like 6 million people watch this, right? And then not to mention that there were people watching it on TV. So obviously it had to be something outdoors. And sort of a ship parade as devised by Frank Brainerd would be significant because the idea was that ships had played like an important role in American history, and so it was a sort of effective way of connecting it, and also just like a spectacle sort of for people to see. So yeah, there's that.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we don't have time for more questions. We have to move on.
Okay.
We only have 30 minutes. We still have 3 more people.
Thank you.
Alada?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mulata Sirota. I was a political science and professional and applied ethics major and minor here at Brooklyn College. A little bit about me. I started Brooklyn College in 2022, and I ended up graduating early 2 years later in this past December, 2024. And because of this sort of accelerated timeline, as you can tell, I'm a little bit of a type A personality. The research project that I decided to do was founded in philosophy, but more specifically, it was founded in the idea of living the good life, how we define it, how we view it. For someone like me, this project was extremely important because we tend to associate ideas of the good life with success, with wealth, with notoriety. So with the advisement of Professor Campos, who I'm very grateful to for helping me out with this project, I researched over the span of about 6 months different philosophies in different contexts, culturally over a different period of time, and in different geographical locations. And this is the culmination of that research. So what I'd like to discuss today is methodological pluralism. Say that 3 times fast. Which I believe to be the philosophical paragon. I think it's the best philosophy because we have an integration of multiple schemas of thought, and I believe that something that most philosophies are missing are flexibility. You'll hear a lot of philosophy majors and minors debate about their favorite thinkers and why they're exceptional, but truly for a human experience as vastly diverse as the one that we have, a diverse thought process, a diverse frame of thinking is best, and that is the argument that I will be making. So firstly, like I said, philosophy. What is philosophy? So from the Greek words philos and sophia, philos meaning love of and sophia meaning wisdom, we get philosophy, which is the discipline that tries to answer life's biggest questions: existence, knowledge, morality, the big things. One of the most important questions in philosophy is, how do we live a good life? Telos, or the highest goal in philosophy, is concerned with that question. But the catch is that there's no objective universal path to living well. There's no one-size-fits-all criteria for the approach. What works for one person might not work for another. So what if instead of choosing one school of thought, we allowed for many philosophies to inform how we live? And that is where methodological pluralism shines. It's a philosophical strategy that blends different perspectives to solve complex problems. Rather than depending on a single system, pluralism gives us a wider and more flexible framework. Rather than choosing a correct philosophy to follow, pluralism urges us to integrate many different schools of thought. And this framework was introduced by William James, who, in his essay, The Will to Believe, says, prima facie, the world is a pluralism. As we find it, its unity seems to be that of any collection. His point? It's pretty simple. The world itself is diverse, and it's not unified by a single logic. So why should human thinking be unified by a single logic? Instead of letting a single framework define our understanding, pluralism lets us draw from many, and that is what makes our answers more accurate and useful, as the world is not a single unchanging truth. It's a collection of overlapping, sometimes conflicting experiences and perspectives. The world isn't fixed, it's not static. It's layered, it's messy, it's dynamic. So shouldn't our thinking reflect that as well? Pluralism isn't about indecision. It's about recognizing that the more ideas we accept, the better insight we have. When we combine ideas, their individual weaknesses are covered by each other's strengths. In The Dilemma of Determinism, James writes, "Actualities seem to float in a wider sea of possibilities from out of which they are chosen." What does this mean? Reality isn't a single fixed thing. It's full of options, and many of these options are valid. Why would we limit ourselves to a single philosophy? One-size-fits-all thought is definitely easier, but it's rarely truthful. Pluralism matches the complexity of a three-dimensional world. It acknowledges that different ideas work better in different situations, across different time periods, and for different cultures. A single philosophy or framework of thinking cannot capture the full scope of the human experience. If we limit ourselves to one stream of consciousness, to one brand of thinking, as with anything, what does limiting ourselves do? It means cutting ourselves off from other valid and potentially life-changing ideas. Pluralism, in contrast, keeps the door open for us. It explores a wider sea of possibilities to design our path based on what actually fits our experience. So what is James proposing with his pluralism framework? If the goal of philosophy is to live well, how do we define living well? Instead of looking at living well as a bulleted list that we can check off with objective criteria, James asks, what interest can there be in achieving the right way unless we are enabled to feel that the wrong way is also a possible and natural way? The good life, James argues, is not about truth value or accuracy. It's not about correctness, it's about meaning. In a world of so many different people with different characters, ambitions, and contexts, rightness fails us as a standard. People vary in characters, in goals, and desires. So a path that works for one person may fail for another. The good life, then, is not a static formula. It is a fluid and dynamic force, tailored to each individual's life and context. What should we use instead to measure a good life? We can use happiness, which is a more personal and flexible measure to evaluate what the good life looks like. Happiness is shaped by each person's unique identity and experience. Trying to define the good life by objective standards doesn't make sense in a world where people are so different. In The Religion of Healthy Mindedness, James writes, "How to gain, how to keep, how to recover happiness is the secret motive of all we do." As something that is inherently subjective, happiness is a more appropriate standard for a world as multifaceted as ours, and pluralism recognizes this. The ramifications of pluralism beyond happiness are agency, our self-control. When we take into account philosophies from different perspectives and blend them to create a philosophy of our own, we develop a moral code applicable to ourselves. And what that does is it encourages the practice of actual morality, not blindly following a set of doctrines, but making decisions in context based on what one values in their life. This freedom of choice is what philosophy is all about, which is why I, in addition to William James, believe that methodological pluralism is the way to go in attaining the good life. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Oh, you have a question?
Yes. All right. So it's like how when information is realized, more information it comes together, right?
Kind of. So, pluralism is more about accepting the fact that instead of a single door that's open, there are multiple doors, and you can go through each of them. It's not a binding choice. Pluralism is about integrating different schools of thought, just to create a wider array of possibilities for oneself. So yeah, technically it is the acknowledgement that we can use all of the information that is accessible to us to inform our choices. But for example, with something like mathematics, where there's a set concrete answer, something like pluralism or philosophy or any of the humanities really, there are a multitude of different ways to receive information, process information, and relate that information to one's experience. So you're just taking a lot of different disciplines, you're integrating them into what works for you. You're discarding the rest, and rather than following a code of morals by a textbook, you're applying what works for your own life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Carmine, you're up.
Okay, so my name is Carmine Tepedino. I'm a second-year student, philosophy major, concentration in medical ethics. Similar to Seth, I was proposed a question by Professor Golub, so shout out to her, which led me to write a pretty long paper about the ethics of moral enhancement, which I'll try to keep short and sweet because I know we're running low on time. So basically, this whole presentation boils down to this question. If we could flip a switch and make everybody moral, everybody do the perfect thing in every situation, should we? So to give you some background on the topic and kind of what I've been studying in class, traditionally we consider and we develop morality through just life experience, learning from others, learning from our own experiences. But as technology develops at a rate that we can't actually keep up with, and I think AI is a very good example of this in that it's a field that develops so rapidly that we actually can't develop regulations for it fast enough. Technology, and especially in the pharmaceutical sense, is very similar. Some people would consider certain medications that already are pretty diffuse and widespread as moral enhancement. I decided to include a picture of this medication on the screen. This is Lexapro, but it's also it's marketed very specifically by, I'm sure you've seen their Subway ads, like Hims and Hers. And you know, it's supposed to be like a trendy, like new way of promoting medication. But a lot of times, like Hims and Hers, like aren't actually put through the same testing and like regulation as regular FDA-approved medication that might cost more or might look different. But I think this is just something to, you know, get you guys thinking about the kinds of enhancements I'm thinking of when I talk about moral enhancement, because that's a term that I'm going to be using a lot this presentation. So this is basically me giving some context on how very well-known philosophers would look at moral enhancement. Like when I say moral enhancement, I mean directly neurologically changing people to make them more moral, capable of basically making perfect moral decisions so that we don't have to deal with, you know, negative moral decisions, you know, people doing bad things. So these are all pretty common philosophers. If you took like a philosophy 101 class, you probably heard of them. So first we have Kant. Kant was a big believer that morality is about your duty and it's not as much about the consequences of your actions. And that they're done, you do these moral actions for the sake of doing them and less for the sake of other external factors. So when you apply this to neurochemical enhancement of somebody's brain for the sake of being more moral, this doesn't really factor in duty, because there is, basically, if you're taking a medication or using a technology that forces you to make a moral decision, you're making that moral decision, but it's not really considering your duty to do that, or your internal process of like deciding to. Then you have Aristotle. Aristotle was a virtue ethicist, which basically means that he was a big believer in having good habits and habituating yourself into doing the right thing. The thing is that virtues, by definition, like what a virtue would be, it can't be artificially synthesized because it has to be developed over time in a community. So taking a pill, like something that looks like, literally just a pill in that picture that I showed earlier, would not give you a virtue. You can't just like take a pill and get it. So like I said, moral enhancement basically skips that part, which, similar to what Kant was saying, is the most valuable part, the development, the habituation, that process of developing a sense of morality. Then you have utilitarianism, which is proposed by John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. I'm sure you've heard of the trolley problem. This is like the classic example. It wouldn't be a philosophy discussion if we weren't talking about the trolley problem. They basically believe that they're the greatest happiness principle, where you should be making the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. But even this, that might seem a bit more cold and calculated, still requires like an internal process, a calculation, a consideration for your environment and your surroundings around you, the people that you're with. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there is nuance to it. If any of you have heard about the trolley problem and are aware of the situation where there's a trolley going under a bridge and there's a large man that you can push off the bridge, killing him and stopping the train from killing more people, that's inherently different than switching the lever and making the trolley divert its track. Utilitarianism acknowledges that there is a difference between doing these two things. So in that, this also has a level of nuance that moral enhancement doesn't have. So what I'm trying to say is that there are common themes. No matter how you look at morality, something that's been common is the fact that moral reasoning is not something that can be achieved by just taking a pill or using a technology, that it's a process that has inherent value, not just instrumental value. So my position is that while moral enhancement seems very noble, it threatens two very important parts of our lives. It threatens our autonomy, and it threatens to erode the virtue and humanity in our lives. And I'll just skip over to the next slide because I explained it in detail here. So my point about the threat to our autonomy, decision is something that we have to practice, kind of like what Aristotle would say. It's something that has to be habituated. And when we artificially enhance these things, we kind of lose that ability to make autonomous decisions because we're just not practicing. It's just like I said, it's a muscle to be trained. When you don't use a muscle, it atrophies, like you can't use it anymore. It's just something that requires practice. So in that sense, whoever's deciding, and this is a completely more specific part of the paper, but someone has to decide what is moral. In other words, like what they put in the pill, what the pill makes you think, why. It's a big discussion of who gets to define that. But at the end of the day, if someone else is defining it and you're not, you don't have the autonomous decision to make those moral calculations. And overall, there's just less discourse, less diversity of thought, and less freedom, which us as Americans we love. So, the loss of virtue and humanity is my second point, and that's basically that a moral person benefits, like I said earlier, instrumentally and intrinsically from being a good person. Meaning that it's not just good to do good things because it makes somebody else happy, or it might benefit you at work, or get you to a higher social status. There is value in actually doing the good act, in the action of doing that good thing, regardless of what the consequence is. And when we eliminate that, we kind of ignore the fact that these intrinsic goods go away, because we're very consequence-oriented, I think, in our society, especially as technology becomes more developed and robust. But it's important to realize that morality is not just the outcome and that it comes with progress and practice. So I'm going to present two objections that I think are pretty strong and valid that could support moral enhancement. Because I know the intuition would be like, oh, this seems very intrusive, very invasive. But this first objection would argue that a more moral society is a better one. So, in other words, would you rather an authentic society where people are taken advantage of, evil things happen, people die, things like that, and people make bad moral decisions, or would you rather an artificial society where everybody lives happily, nobody's taken advantage of, these bad moral decisions aren't made, and it's kind of a utopia? My rebuttal to this is that, like I said before, morality is not just about the outcomes, and people, whether they realize it or not, do value the way in which they get to these decisions. And if any of you have ever heard of Nozick's experience machine, people would rather experience things themselves than have a good outcome and just kind of plug themselves into a machine or surrender to a technology or a medication. Second objection that I'll be addressing is that moral enhancement is as simple as fixing a biological deficiency. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about our brain chemistry, neurochemistry, and if we can fix someone's eyesight, or let's say we can fix someone's heart failure with a pill, what's the difference in just giving them a pill to make them make better decisions? And this is where the whole Lexapro discussion becomes a lot more relevant. And I would rebut that you can't actually equate these two, let's say, heart failure and making bad moral decisions, because even though they both come as a result of a biological process, morality is inherently tied to our consciousness and our personality. In other words, whether or not our heart is working or not, it might have a physical effect on the way we live our lives and the more pragmatic aspects of how we live. But when we change our morality, we really change our identity. And like I said before, we lose our autonomy. So it really does have a larger impact that something more biological like eyesight and heart disease, these are just two arbitrary examples, have different effects. And I also want to make the distinction that eyesight and, let's say, heart failure, when you give somebody a pair of glasses, you're restoring them to the normal level of vision. You're not giving them like bionic glasses that can, give them X-ray vision and, like really good eyesight. You're restoring them to 20/20. Same thing with heart failure. People who get valves put in their hearts and they get devices that pump their blood, it's restoring them to the regular level of a heart function. There are people who have moral deficiencies, neurological deficiencies, who have, depression, anxiety, and that's why we have those medications like Lexapro. But to enhance more than would be considered the normal amount is a completely different discussion. So just to summarize, the implications of moral enhancement would be the loss of moral progress, as we wouldn't be having these debates. A standardized morality where someone is deciding what is considered moral for everybody. The potential for manipulation, like I said, someone could be deciding what the morality is for everybody else. And intellectual stagnation, which I think I will kind of go into here. So I decided to put a picture from The Matrix because, to keep everybody engaged. I know a lot of times when I'm talking about philosophy, it can get very abstract, and I kind of lose, like Seth was saying before, like Charlie Brown. The Matrix, I think, is a pretty applicable example. For those of you who don't know, this guy is given a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. The blue pill lets him stay in like a dream life where he doesn't really know what's going on. He's just happy, but he's not aware of the larger, more pressing issues, for lack of, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the Matrix right now. And the red pill basically makes him aware of everything that's going on, all the bad things as well as the good things. So what I would suggest, as I believe that things like this, what I'm talking about, are coming. It's very hard to picture it. It might be very dystopian or utopian, But as we've seen with things like AI, like things develop way faster than we could ever imagine. And it would be naive to say that these things will never exist. So I would just say that we can't stop it from coming per se, but what we can do is embrace struggles, resist shortcuts when we can, have presentations like this, have discussions, and just take the red pill in the sense that, you know, you're making yourself aware of these things, and you're having these discussions. That's a great way to resist it. Yeah. Thank you. That's my references.
Thank you.
Oh, well, save the best for last. 1 second. So, welcome everyone to today's presentation. We'll be exploring the origins, evolution, and cultural impact of African American choral music. We'll also spotlight Dr. Nathan M. Carter, a key figure who helped elevate this tradition to new heights. Through this journey, you'll see how music served not only as an art form, but also as a tool for resilience and political change. And at the end of this presentation, I will perform a African American choral piece. So the roots of African American choral music. African American choral music has deep roots in the spirituals created by enslaved Africans. These spirituals were a fusion of African rhythmic patterns and the Christian hymns forced upon them during slavery. They weren't just songs, they carried hidden messages of hope, survival, and resistance. Spirituals laid the foundation for what would later become gospel and so many other genres. After emancipation, spirituals continued to evolve, giving rise to gospel music. The Fish Jubilee Singers, founded in 1871, were crucial in bringing spirituals to international stages, gaining respect and recognition for Black music. Over time, choral music became vital in Black churches, at community events, and within educational institutions, embedding itself into the social and cultural fabric of African American life. Choral music wasn't just about worship or performance, it was deeply political. During the Civil Rights Movement, songs like We Shall Overcome became anthems of resistance. Choirs sang at marches, rallies, and sit-ins using music to inspire hope and solidarity. Artists like Bernice Johnson Reagan founded groups like Sweet Honey in the Rock, blending music and activism powerfully. Dr. Nathan M. Carter was a pivotal figure. Born in Selma, Alabama in 1936, Carter was not only a talented conductor and arranger, but also a passionate educator. He studied at prestigious institutions like Hampton, Peabody, and Catholic universities. In 1970, he took the helm of the Morgan State University Choir and completely transformed it into a world-class ensemble. Okay. Dr. Carter's genius was in blending European classical choral techniques with African American spirituals and gospel traditions. Under his leadership, the Morgan State Choir performed at iconic venues like Carnegie Hall and even toured internationally. Beyond performances, his mentorship nurtured the next generation of musical talent, expanding the reach of Black choral excellence. If you know who Take Six is, Take Six was a group at Oakwood University, and they were part of a group called the Aeolians. They came out of Dr. Nathan Carter's, what are we gonna call it? His time there. Okay. Dr. Carter's arrangements are still performed today, keeping African American heritage alive and vibrant. His work at Morgan State helped redefine what Black choral music could look and sound like on the global stage. He remains a symbol of cultural pride, musical brilliance, and educational leadership, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to inspire. African American choral music is a living testament to resilience, artistry, and the power of community. It shaped and continues to shape both political movements and cultural identity across generations. Figures like Dr. Nathan M. Carter remind us of the transformative power of music and the importance of preserving these legacies for future generations. In closing, African American choral music is a living testament to resilience and the power of community. Yeah. Okay, So now I'm going to, let me put my references. Now I'm going to perform a piece arranged by him. This song was sung by Mahalia Jackson at Dr. Martin Luther King's funeral in 1968. But this arrangement is arranged by Dr. Nathan Carter. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do person not, if I can bring their beauty to a word or song, if I can spread the message that the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Anybody have any questions? Yes, thank you.